On Tatum leaving the TD Garden as the Warriors celebrated their championship, Mannix writes this: even now, Jayson Tatum winces at the memory. Leaning back in his locker that night, everything he accomplished, all-star starter, all-NBA first team, the 7th highest scoring average, 26.9 points per game in Celtics history, felt meaningless. Showered, changed, and fresh from rehashing the finals with a few dozen reporters, Tatum could still hear the celebration as he walked to his car. Definitely not a good feeling, he says. What he saw earlier bothered him more. Golden State's celebrating on Boston's home floor. That, says Tatum, I'll never forget. And that is where we start with the Daily Thread today with Chris Mannix of SI, Chris Gasper of the Boston Globe, two very esteemed writers, two big Boston Celtics guys. And I'm not going to lie, when I was reading this, and I know we're going to get into more excerpts, but what struck me, Mannix, was Jayson Tatum's kind of a soft-spoken guy. He doesn't always show a fire, which I think has bothered people, myself included. And he seems pissed. Like, he dropped the F-bomb. Congratulations, like a Boston number of times in that article.
I tell you, he did. He talked, during our interview, he used colorful language a few times as well. And I'd spent a few weeks before that talking to people that were close to Tatum. And they did describe a shift in him, a change that they've seen from previous off seasons. A guy that went from, kind of focused on a few different things to focused only on one thing, and that's finding a way to get his team to a championship level. And that meant improving his own game. So he targeted very specific things. He targeted ways to get to the free throw line more when he goes to the basket. He worked with Kevin Durant this offseason. We all saw those pictures hit online. But when he was working with Durant, one of the things they worked on extensively was how Durant was able to protect the basketball so well. We know Tatum had 100 turnovers in the playoffs last year. That was a point of emphasis for him this offseason. So we went into the summer really locked in on finding his weaknesses and shoring each one of them up.
And I mean, Chris, why I guess I'm more hopeful, not just the attitude, but he puts in a lot of work, Gasper, every offseason, but he's also tired a lot. He took, also in your article I read, he took 2 whole weeks off, didn't even call his trainer. He rested. For the first time, we might have a guy where that work pays off down the line because he's not gassed from playing in all these tournaments and the Olympics and stuff.
Yeah, that was something in Mannix's article, too, just the idea of learning how to take on that workload, right? And the ability to be able to manage that and still have something left in the tank, and talking to Kevin Durant about that. I mean, I think, really just reading the article and just everything you hear about the Celtics, the physical part of the game for Jayson Tatum seems to come relatively easily. He puts the work in, but I think from the jump we've looked at him and said he's kind of a natural, where maybe Jaylen Brown doesn't always have that sort of natural ability. But I think the mental shift for him that you see in this article and just around the team, I think that's really important. That shift from sort of like, remember when he did the article with The Athletic and it was like, I should have been All-NBA, this, that. And now it seems like that's not the stuff that matters to him. It's about winning. It's about putting that banner up in the rafters.
It did change because, and I'd reported this around February of last year, that when Tatum started to get it rolling, he had actually called Joel Embiid and said to him, like, you better get the MVP this year because I'm getting it next year. Like, this summer after the finals experience, it wasn't anything about that. It was all about team wins. And I alluded to something like this in the story. Tatum played a lot of 5-on-5 with different people over the offseason. He made sure that his teams never lost. Like, he was entirely focused on winning games, not about putting up his numbers.
Did you notice? I know this is like crazy to ask you to sort of psychoanalyze someone, but could you notice a difference? You talk to him all the time. You see him. Is his body language different? Like the way he carries himself? Because again, I think it comes across sometimes as just a, again, soft-spoken.
Yeah, easygoing.
Soft-spoken to the point where sometimes it almost seems like apathy, like, yeah, we lost, but you know what? We lost. But it doesn't, this seems different.
I don't know if his body language is ever going to change. I don't know if he's ever going to become this demonstrative leader that some people want him to be, but his game can certainly go to another level. And that's certainly the most important thing. I know Jaylen Brown said during media day that one of the things he wants to see from Jace is be a more vocal leader. I'm just not sure that's ever going to come. It's not really in his DNA. What is, though, is just going to that next level and putting yourself not just in the MVP conversation, but perhaps even as the MVP.
Yeah, can he be more ferocious, you guys, on the court, too? Because I don't care what you say at the, of course I do, because we're in media.
Yeah.
But I don't care as much about what you say on the court as if, like, good or bad, what always drove me nuts last year was the head hanging, the complaining, the lollygagging back, where I wonder if there's a ferocity now, Gasper, where it's like, no, that didn't work for me last year. I've watched it. I'm embarrassed by it.
Sure.
And now I'm pummeling down the court to get back on the other end.
Well, what Mannix was saying about playing those 5-on-5 games and taking sort of ownership for his team's result, I think that is good. You know, I think back to a couple of things last year. One good, one not so good. In terms of being soft-spoken, he is. But I also remember after they lost Game 5 at the Garden, he was like no panic mode, adamant. I mean, he didn't guarantee a win, but he all but did that they were going to go to Milwaukee and win. And they did, and he dropped 46. Yeah. Now, the bad part, what I didn't like, was after they lost on their home floor in the finals, Game 6, you know, he's out there with Marcus Smart, just the two of them. It's like, no, you had a terrible season. You need to be out there on your own. And Smart sort of started the press conference even without Tatum because Tatum, I think, was talking to someone on the phone or he was doing something with his family or whatever. And I'm like, no, this should not be the two of them. This should be Tatum on his own answering questions about why he struggled so much in this series.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, guys in the playoffs, they do tend to cluster and talk around LeBron and Wade forever.
Sure.
You know, that tends to happen in that way. I'm just to your point about being more ferocious. I think that's going to be a big part of his game this season. I think he has taken to heart some of his weaknesses, specifically getting to the free throw line, getting to the basket, being more physical when you have the ball, not committing so many turnovers. Those things I'm looking for. And look, a slight jump for Jayson Tatum, again, puts him in that top 2 or 3 MVP mix. I think this is the year we're talking about Jayson Tatum in like March and April as being a potential MVP.
All right, we want to get to one more excerpt of yours on all of the Jaylen Brown trade rumors. Tatum admits that he wondered, you wrote, Tatum admits that he wondered how Brown would react to the latest round of rumors. It's never easy, says Tatum. Ask those in and around the Celtics about the relationship between the two, and the answers are similar. Great. Ask privately whether there is any friction, and the answers are the same. Jayson brags about how good Jaylen is, says Hanlon. Hanlon is Jayson Tatum's trainer. How there aren't many players he would trade straight up for him. Any narrative that they didn't like each other, that they can't win together, is totally made up. And I bring up the fact that that is his trainer because I do want to ask you, do you buy what he's selling?
I do.
Right? Because this is someone who's close to Jayson
Tatum.
Right,
but it's the kind of thing that I heard from multiple people over the weeks that I was reporting that story. And Drew Hanlon's a guy that I had talked to extensively about Jayson's offseason. And I'd said to him, like, look, off the record, just tell me kind of what the vibe is like. I'll tell you off the record the same thing I'd say on the record, that these two are closer than people think. And specifically, Jayson believes that Jaylen is elite. He believes he's one of the great players in this league and believes that the two of them can win a championship together. Look, all the talk about Jaylen Brown over the years moving him, it's always been for an A-lister. It's always been Anthony Davis, Kawhi Leonard. This offseason, it's Kevin Durant. But outside of those guys, I don't think there's anybody in the league the Celtics would trade Jaylen Brown for.
So when I look at their relationship, I agree with everything, you know, Chris is saying there. I think the issue is Tatum looks at Jaylen Brown as an A-lister. The question is, do the fans look at him that way? And I think that's where sort of I don't want to say friction, because it's not friction between them, but I think maybe frustration for Jaylen Brown and some of the people around him comes sometimes. It's like, okay, why does Tatum get put on this pedestal? And, you know, oh, he had this amazing, like, 40-point game. He had the most turnovers in the postseason in history, as Mannix pointed out. Jaylen Brown has a game against Miami where no one else shows up and has 40 points, and all they're asking him about after the game is the turnovers. The guys don't get treated the same, and you wonder if at some point that becomes an issue, not between them, but an issue in terms of whether Jaylen's going to, you know, stick around here.
I was going to say, because does that really matter? Like, does it matter what we think at the end of the day as long as they get along? But could that influence him? Like, is anyone in the Celtics worried that if Jaylen doesn't feel loved here by the organization, by the fan base, that he's not here for the long haul?
I think that is a legitimate concern because, as we know, the Celtics are not going to be able to deal with Jaylen Brown contractually until his contract is up in a couple of years. Just makes no sense for Jaylen Brown to do a deal until that point. And a lot can happen in a couple of years. One thing that didn't make it into the story that I believe to be true, I do believe Jaylen Brown was more annoyed by the trade chat of this offseason than he was about previous. He won't say anything that he hasn't said much about the trade rumors, but this is a guy coming off a finals run with the team where you can make the argument that he was the best player for the Celtics in the finals. All of a sudden, he wakes up from his vacation and he's being talked about being traded once again. The Celtics, Ime Udoka, Brad Stevens, they went out and met with him. Supposedly that settled some of it down at the moment, but I do think Jaylen was more annoyed about this trade shadow than he was previous years.
All right, so relationship storyline to bed, but not so much with Jaylen Brown's happiness.